all set. says talk and the light's on. Levi, red light talk, right? Red light off, don't expect to be heard.
Exactly how it works.
Excellent, okay. And we're doing yellow at 1 minute left?
Yellow's at 1.
Right. So we have 5 minutes total, yellow at 1 minute. Perfect.
For the Q&A time, each member's going to have 3, and you'll be using your time.
Yeah, so don't be deceived by the 3 minutes. That's the member opening statements will be 3 minutes. The member questions will be 3 minutes.
But
Your testimony is 5 minutes.
Perfect.
So, but I expect Chairman Questioning to be hard on the gavel in terms of at 5 minutes he's going to stop because we have a lot of members, compressed time. So.
You know me, I like to do in conclusion just as in the moment before the red light comes on.
We welcome that.
At the end of the yellow.
Maybe I work backwards. I'll start with the conclusion.
Make sure you get the important points out.
Committees, we decided the thank yous took at least.
Thank you.
We might compress that. Say we thank all the chairs and the members here.
Looking forward to this. It's a good experience for our ag committee folks to think differently about all of this. We've been pushing them pretty hard.
So that's kind of it. Well, like I said, I think we're likely to suspend.
I did. I
after
switched
the
committees.
testimony,
I was at Ways and Means. Now I'm at Agriculture doing food standards.
Sounds good, thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to have the two. Is it?
That's not part of Ways.
Before that they've been doing?
This is a joint hearing between our two.
We've looked back.
First time ever.
Never done, so I did the title wrong.
That's all right.
Two with
It's all
the
right.
workforce committee.
So it's a
It
little
took some time
confusing.
to try to understand, but I still don't.
No, it's all right. It's just we have a lot of kind of overlap, and so we thought this was because we've been kind of really focused on what's bigger than bigger than just the Senate.
Yeah, that's fine.
So what better place to do it than with
If there's an Iowa emergency, you have codes for
Now, Mr.
come to that.
Davis, he's from,
Chairman on the wall.
Yes, Rodney Davis.
Microphone check, 1, 2, 3. Microphone check for court reporter, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
yeah, they just met with him.
okay.
I don't know if he's from Chicago.
It's out of way.
He might take umbrage at that.
Right, no, Danny Davis.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Microphone check. Probably there's a lot of noise in here too. So.
That's your district.
You good?
We've had too many Davises too. We've got too many, Scotts. We have two Scotts. So, isn't that, okay. Eric, I'm Ann. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. Heard you
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Davis.
Yes.
Microphone check, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, former staffer, so kind of.
Oh, is he? Oh, so that's,
Yeah.
so he's smart too.
And he knows. Sometimes he's like, my staff's gonna kill me because I'm not gonna use the thing you provided me. I'm just gonna go for it. So it has its pros and cons, and so you heard the explanation.
Testing. Court reporter mic check. 1, 2, 3.
Welcome to today's hearing. I'll ask our witnesses to take their seats. As chairman of the Ways and Means Human Resources Subcommittee, I'm honored to welcome Chairman Conaway of the Agriculture Committee, along with Chairwoman Pilarsky and our colleagues from the Agriculture and Nutrition Subcommittee for today's joint hearing. In the interest of time, and so we can move quickly to our witness testimony, both sides have agreed to limit members' opening statements to 3 minutes apiece. Since we're accompanied by Chairman Conaway, we'll break precedent here, and I'll yield time to Chairman Conaway to make his opening statement, if he would. Well,
Down there with you?
yeah, you can go first since you're set, and we'll go to Chairman Ryan afterwards.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Ryan and Chairman Boustany and the Ways and Means Committee for hosting the first joint hearing between our two committees as we explore how our welfare system can discourage work. It's surprising that our committees have not engaged formally before, given the overlap in our recipient populations. According to the most recent SNAP characteristics report, 20% of SNAP recipients receive supplemental security income, 24% receive some form of Social Security income, 9% receive child support enforcement payments, 7% receive support from TANF, and 4% receive unemployment income. While today's hearing is about work, the level of overlap suggests this is only the beginning of our efforts to better coordinate programs across the committee jurisdictions. Throughout our top-to-bottom review of the past, present, and future of SNAP, we've had an eye towards strengthening the program so that it doesn't become a trap, but rather a tool to help individuals move up the economic ladder. We've included a number of former recipients and frontline non-governmental organizations who we now know are succeeding despite our welfare system. Our hearing series has shown us that SNAP does not operate in a vacuum and that it plays an important role in the lives of nearly 46 million Americans. This is why the hearings like today are important. Recipients don't think in terms of program, but while we do, it's our responsibility to look beyond our programs to understand the experience of the recipients and the potential unintended consequences. During our last hearing, we heard from practitioners about how they engage individuals to help them succeed in the workforce. We quickly encountered the reality of the cliff effect when programs designed to support work do just the opposite. There's great dignity that comes from being able to provide financially for one's own family, but that feeling can easily be overrun when our welfare system creates a situation where earnings do not necessarily translate into higher income. This is not a problem that can be addressed by SNAP alone. It's going to take a coordinated effort. Thank you again for hosting this important meeting, joint hearing. I look forward to working with Chairman Ryan, Chairman Boustany, and your committee to ensure that our welfare system is prepared to address current and future challenges. We know that work is the best way to help individuals climb the economic ladder, and we must ensure that our policies work toward that, policies reward that work. I look forward to the hearing and yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Conaway. Now I'm pleased to yield time to Chairman Ryan, the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee.
Well, first of all, thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's been a long time since I've sat down here in these seats there. The view's a little different, I got to admit. I want to welcome our colleagues from the Agriculture Committee, including my friend Chairman Conaway and Chairwoman Pilarsky and Ranking Member McGovern. We're happy to have you. We're happy to host this, but we want to thank you for letting us use your committee room twice when we were renovating this room earlier in the year. This is an important hearing because for the past 50 years, we've been waging this war on poverty, and I don't think you can really call it anything but a stalemate. I'm not saying we haven't made any progress. We clearly have, but the federal government has spent trillions of dollars on dozens of programs, and yet upward mobility is no better than where it was when we started. Today, if you were raised poor, you are just as likely to stay poor as you were 50 years ago. Here's the problem. We've created 80 different programs to try and fill 80 different holes in people's budgets: healthcare, childcare, energy, education, and more. You qualify for these programs on income, naturally. If you don't make much, you get a lot of benefits. But as you make more, you start to lose your benefits very quickly in some cases. Because we've piled these programs right on top of each other, the fall-off can be really steep. And the more you make, you can end up losing a ton. Take a single mom with one child earning the minimum wage. And she gets offered a job paying her $3 more an hour. When you factor in the taxes and the benefit cuts that she'll experience, she will only get to take home 10 cents of every extra dollar she makes. What's the point in taking that job? So you find that we've been filling holes, but we've actually been building a trap. And we're isolating people from the rest of the communities. We're isolating people from getting out of poverty. Right now, we have a safety net that is designed to catch people falling into poverty. What we need is a safety net to help lift people out of poverty. And so the way I see it, we've got three choices. Number one, we either accept the status quo and just do nothing. Number two, we reinforce the status quo and simply just do more of the same. That will only make it harder for people to get from welfare to work. Or number three, we reform the status quo. We try something different. Get people in jobs or in training. Customize benefits to fit people's needs. Make sure that it always pays to work. These are the principles that we want to put into practice. We need another round of welfare reform so that we can actually have a safety net pulling people from poverty, from welfare, into work, into a better life. You know, Pope Francis recently said, "Where there is no work, there is no dignity." That's the challenge we face, to protect and to promote the dignity of work. And I look forward to working with our colleagues in the future to do just that, and I think this hearing is a great start. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Ryan. I would like to amplify that this hearing is a very historic event. Since 1995, the Human Resources Subcommittee has held joint hearings with other committees only twice, and never with our colleagues on the Agriculture Committee. It's way overdue that we approach this subject matter in this way. That's despite the wide overlap between the programs we oversee that assist millions of Americans with food stamps and other welfare benefits. So today's hearing is long overdue. It reflects the start of what I hope will be much closer cooperation ahead between our committees. What we will explore today is one of the worst side effects of current welfare program rules, the fact that getting a job or working more does not always make families better off. This poverty trap may be unintended, but for those in its grips, it's all too real. We need to review how we got here, how real people are affected, and how we can reform the system to help people go to work and earn more instead of making them worse off when they do just that. Consider how destructive today's anti-work signals are. We have a chart, I'll put it up on the screen. This chart shows one thing we know for sure is that work, and especially full-time work, is really the only cure for poverty. Less than 3% of people who work full-time are poor. In contrast, people who don't work are 8 to 10 times more likely to be poor. So promoting work is the real key to helping people avoid poverty. Benefits can and should serve as a temporary bridge between jobs or to supplement earnings when someone can find only part-time work. But unless we're willing to tolerate more poverty, and I am not, those benefits need to reinforce, not undermine, the importance of work. Redesigning welfare benefits to do just that is the challenge before us. I look forward to all the testimony and to working with members on both sides of the aisle to find solutions to this problem. And with that, I'm happy to yield to my colleague, Mr. Doggett, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for an opening statement.
Thank you, and for the opportunity to consider these matters. You know, when Lyndon Johnson declared war on poverty, he got underway programs that have changed the lives of millions of Americans for the better. In 1996, when we approved welfare reform, which I supported, we recognized there was a need to consider some of those programs and make alterations. When I hear talk this morning of another round of welfare reform, I want to be sure that the reform that's coming achieves more than the 1996 reform. Does not simply use federal resources to permit the states to displace their own commitment, and denies so much assistance to individuals compared to where we were in 1996. It needs to be about lifting people up, not just reform that is about cutting and numbers. There are things that this hearing can focus on that I think can be helpful. If you means test programs, benefits eventually stop after an individual earns a certain amount of money. We can and should mitigate the impact by preventing eligibility cliffs. And we have one model for that, though it's under constant attack in this room, and that's the Affordable Care Act. It did just that for low-income workers by allowing them to earn more and still receive Medicaid in those states that had the good judgment to accept 100 cents on the dollar to finance their Medicaid, or to receive private tax credits for private insurance. But our Republican colleagues have continued to insist that these important steps must be repealed, and many governors, like my own, have refused to fully implement the promise of the Affordable Care Act. We can increase the full the phase-out range for programs so that benefits decline more gradually when a person goes to work. We can support programs that now actively promote and reward work, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit. But for some people, the solution to every problem I view as rather block-headed. It's to block grant everything. Rather than pursuing these common sense approaches of supporting work, I hope that this one-size-fits-all answer of block grants is not the only one advanced, along with cutting federal funding. Mr. Chairman, Americans deserve better than a cut-and-run strategy. We need concrete proposals for helping Americans find, keep, and advance in employment, not a reduction in the federal commitment to reaching this critical goal. I hope our witnesses will provide additional insight and recommendations for how we achieve that objective, and I yield back, and thank you.
I thank the gentleman for a statement. I now yield time to the chairwoman of the Agriculture Subcommittee, Mrs. Pilarsky, for the purposes of an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bustani. Thank you to Chairman Ryan as well for hosting this historic joint hearing between our two committees as we better explore how our welfare system can discourage work. As the chair of the Nutrition Subcommittee, we've spent the past 5 months exploring the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as food stamps. Our review of the past, present, and future of SNAP is why we're here today. We will explore real issues with another committee that's having many of the same discussions as we are. Throughout our review, I've stressed that we cannot just examine SNAP in a vacuum. We have to recognize there are other programs that exist and explore how they work or don't work together. In my home state of Indiana, my fellow Hoosiers aren't concerned about whose jurisdiction of committees this is. They care more about how we as legislators work together. Today is the next step in that process. During our last hearing, witnesses discussed the importance of case management and how they engage with recipients. We heard stories detailing the barriers they face. For example, workers near the poverty line who are eligible for multiple assistance programs stand to lose financially by increasing their income as their benefits are phased out. This is described by analysts as the welfare cliff. In the face of such a scenario, many people forego raises or put in fewer hours. Individual programs may attempt to address this, but it still requires a broader view of how programs interact to ensure that we as policymakers are not inadvertently discouraging work. Welfare programs should support those in need, not deter them from reaching their full potential in the workplace. I do worry that this cliff is a serious obstacle when recipients try to enter, re-enter, and remain in the workforce in order to climb the economic ladder. Helping recipients move into better paying jobs not only benefits their families, but also benefits taxpayers. I'm looking forward to hearing about ways to explore how we can improve the operation of these programs in order to help millions of Americans seeking a better future. Again, I thank the Chairman Ryan and Chairman Bustani for hosting, and I look forward to working with them in the future. I also want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today with us and look forward to their testimony.
I thank the gentlelady. Now yield time to the ranking member of the Agriculture Subcommittee, Mr. McGovern.
Thank you. You know, the hard reality is that we can and we must do a better job in fighting hunger and poverty in America. You know, for 7 years now, I've called for a White House conference on food, nutrition, and hunger. Holding a White House conference like this would be a major step forward in our effort to reduce hunger and poverty by better connecting the dots amongst federal and state agencies, nonprofits, faith-based communities, schools, hospitals, and the business community. Such a conference would help us better understand and meet the needs of the millions of Americans struggling to put food on the table and to help them transition to a better place. You know, being poor in America is hard work, and quite frankly, our safety net has some holes in it, and it must be strengthened to meet some of our families' most basic needs. You know, talk to those who run our food banks. They'll tell you that at the end of every month, SNAP families are at their doors because they can't afford to purchase any more food. And while we all want to encourage work, let's state for the record that a majority of those on SNAP are kids, elderly, and the disabled. They are not expected to work. Of those who are expected to work, more than half do. Among those who work, 58% worked full-time for 6 months or more after receiving SNAP. Remember that the next time you hear someone claim that SNAP recipients don't work. About 60% of SNAP recipients who are expected to work do work for 6 months or more after receiving SNAP benefits. The real problem is that those who work earn so little that they still are eligible for the program. I believe that if you work in this country, you ought not to live in poverty. Where's the outrage over lousy wages? And yes, Pope Francis, and I agree with him, said, where there is no work, there is no dignity. But what about the indignity of low wages, of working hard 2, 3 jobs and still living in poverty? You know, no doubt this is a complex problem, and I think American families deserve more. But that means talking about raising the minimum wage to a livable wage so that workers can earn enough to support their families, and it means creating a sustainable path to phase out safety net benefits only after they are on solid footing. Now, some of my friends have suggested we lower the marginal tax rates. An easy way to accomplish that is to extend phase-out ranges for programs in addition to SNAP, which I'm sure some of my friends might not be crazy about because it will cost more. But without that critical investment, any changes in SNAP could hurt the program and actually make poverty worse. I'm all for flexibility too, but if flexibility is code for block grants, I've got a big problem with that. Too often this results in anti-hunger programs like SNAP being underfunded and our most vulnerable families being left behind. Passing the buck to states, finding more ways to avoid adequate federal investments in battling poverty solves nothing. You know, cutting SNAP as we did last year in the Farm Bill, cutting funding for job training, not permanently extending key features of the EITC or child tax credit. These are dangerous policies that have often been presented by some of my colleagues as solutions. These ideas make me nervous about what the majority is up to, and everyone at today's hearing should think carefully about the consequences of such reckless approaches to the very programs that are essential to helping America's most vulnerable families get on the path to the middle class. And I thank the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for his opening statement. Without objection, each member will have the opportunity to submit a written statement and have it included in the record at this point. Now we'll turn to our panel of witnesses, and I want to remind our witnesses to limit their oral statements to 5 minutes. However, without objection, all of the written testimony will be made part of the permanent record. This morning we'll hear from Dr. Casey Mulligan, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Chicago. Next, and we're going to accommodate our next witness's schedule when she arrives. She's had a little transportation issue. We'll have Chanel McCorkle of Baltimore, Maryland, accompanied by Marcia Nettis, Director of Operations at America Works of Baltimore. Thirdly, Eric Randolph, Senior Fellow, Illinois Policy Institute. Fourth, Olivia Golden, Executive Director, Center for Law and Social Policy. And fifth, Dr. Eugene Sterling, Senior Fellow, Urban Institute. We welcome all of you. Your testimony is going to be very helpful as we carve a path forward on this. And so with that, Mr. Mulligan, please proceed with your testimony.
Chairman Bustani, Chairman Walorski, Ranking Member Doggett, and Ranking Member McGovern, and all the members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity and the honor today to discuss with you about how public policy has affected the reward to working. A basic economic principle is that the monetary reward to working has important effects on how many people are employed and how much they work. People without jobs or otherwise with low incomes sometimes receive benefits from social safety net programs. The benefits themselves are rarely called taxes by laymen, but economists understand the benefits to have many of the characteristics of tax rates because a program beneficiary loses some or all of her benefits as a consequence of accepting a job. I have illustrated the reward idea in Figure 1 of my testimony. The left bar in that figure measures the resources available when working, and the right bar measures the resources the same person would have if not working, including subsidies net of taxes paid. The difference between the two bars is the monetary reward to working. Now consider adding a new safety net program, which I put in green, or expanding an old one. Exactly because it gives more help when not working, the new program reduces the reward to working. The combined effect of taxes and subsidies on the reward to accepting a job can be summarized as a penalty, the effective amount that is lost from paying taxes and replacing benefits associated with not working. I like to express that penalty as a marginal tax rate, namely as a percentage of employee compensation. If there were no penalty, then the marginal tax rate would be 0. Thanks to a labyrinth of tax and subsidy programs, the marginal tax rate can equal or exceed 100%, which means that at least as many resources are available when not working as when working. Government tax and spending rules reduce the reward to working for two separate reasons. First, the rules include income contingencies. The more income from work means more taxes and fewer benefits. But second, and separate and not unimportant, is the rules include employment contingencies. More employment for a family affects its taxes and benefit amounts, even if their income is the same. For unmarried middle-class Americans, SNAP is not a marginal tax on their income despite the 30% benefit reduction rate because they are ineligible for the program whenever they are working. But SNAP is a marginal tax on their employment because every month out of work is another month of SNAP eligibility. This is one of the many examples where a program's employment contingencies have different economics from its income contingencies. Legislation that cuts or credits taxes, so to speak, can nonetheless reduce the reward to working and increase the marginal tax rate if it cuts taxes more for those who work than it cuts taxes for those who work less. At the same time that safety net programs implicitly tax job acceptance, they also implicitly subsidize layoffs because the programs absorb some of the income and production that employer and employee together lose when an employee stops working. Layoff subsidies give employers and employees less incentives to take the steps that might avoid or delay layoffs. Let me be clear, America absolutely must have taxes and safety net programs, even though they reduce the reward to working, and even though they subsidize layoffs. But if you want to understand what is happening in the labor market or to the budgets of social programs, it's counterproductive to approximate marginal tax rates as zero or to assume that they are eternally constant regardless of what comes in new legislation. The resources provided for people, not employed or underemployed, have increased in the past decade. SNAP program rules have changed in a variety of ways. Unemployment benefits are now paid in a variety of new circumstances. The Recovery Act and now the Affordable Care Act help unemployed people pay for their health insurance. Figure 2 shows my estimates of 9 years marginal tax rates coming from tax and subsidy programs, taking into account that some of the poor and unemployed do not participate in all, or sometimes none, of the safety net programs. The combined effect of these and other changes through this year was to reduce the reward to work, that is, increase marginal tax rates for most of the non-elderly population. The cumulative effect of all this legislation is to increase average marginal labor income tax rates by 7 percentage points over what they were in 2007. A presumably unintended consequence of the recent safety net expansions has been to reduce the reward to working and thereby keeping unemployment and poverty rates high, keeping national spending low longer than they would have been if safety net program rules had remained unchanged. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We will defer on Ms. McCorkle and Ms. Nettis' testimony until she arrives, and then, so next we'll go to Mr. Randolph. Mr. Randolph, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to sincerely thank the chairwoman, the chairman, and all the members of the subcommittees for inviting me to be here today and allowing me to speak. You have before you a very challenging issue. This is difficult and complex, and I am pleased that you have the courage to undertake it. It is solvable. Let me say it is solvable, and you can succeed in, and I think you will succeed. And this nation will be better because of your efforts. My name is Eric Randolph, and I am a senior fellow with the Illinois Policy Institute, and I also provide analytical services as an independent consultant. Last year, the Institute sponsored me to develop a computational model examining welfare benefits, federal, state, local, and to determine the impact of economic incentives relative to employment. The results of the study are nothing short of astounding. In some cases, it literally does not pay to climb up that career or opportunity ladder. Now, just imagine that you are a single parent with 2 children living in Lake County. It's a suburb of Chicago. You have a job earning $12 an hour. Someone offers you a job for $18 an hour. Should you take the job? Well, under the scenario that we studied, the answer is no, keep your $12 per hour job. At first glance, this makes no sense. Of course, someone would prefer to make $18 as opposed to $12. But as a single parent managing a household with children, you want to maximize all your resources. You have children to take care of, yourself to take care of, and it doesn't matter if those resources are earned through work or if it's given to you through benefits. A single parent in Lake County earning $12 an hour brings home just over $22,000 a year. However, that same single parent is eligible for an array of welfare benefits that we can categorize: the refundable tax credits, the food assistance, housing assistance, subsidized child care services, and medical assistance. When you add up the value of all the benefits that they can receive from these programs, it comes to an astounding $40,000. Now, that makes the total receivables, when we include the earned income, almost $62,000. Now, in comparison, suppose this mother would take the job earning $18 an hour, okay? She would lose almost $34,000 in the benefits. So that to gain only $11,000. Now, why would anyone take a job to gain $11,000 but lose $34,000 in benefits? This is the welfare cliff that we're talking about, and this is what traps people. This is just but one scenario we studied using the computational model. We studied 2 other counties in Illinois, and we studied 2 parent households, and guess what? It's essentially the same. So, the system that let me just say, we drew a number of conclusions looking at this. The very first one is the magnitude of the potential benefits of the family that they receive is large. That's a general conclusion. $40,000 is not a small sum of money. The second is that the welfare cliffs can be significant, and it's cruel. The third is economic disincentives are real, major, and they can indeed trap families. The fourth is the system is inequitable. And that is, if I compare someone who's not receiving these benefits, could be worse off financially than someone receiving these benefits. That's not equitable. Fifth, programs with the steepest cutoffs are the greatest culprits. Finally, everyone should agree that there ought to be an income ladder such that when someone earns more money, he or she is in fact better off. However, this is not the system we have as a nation today. It will take the cooperation of many individuals and political courage. In my opinion, we will not be successful by giving more control to the federal government. We can only succeed if we take advantage of the laboratories of democracy, allowing states to innovate in finding the best solutions.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Golden, you're recognized for your oral testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Bustani, Chairman Walorski, Ranking Member Doggett, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the committees. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. I'm Olivia Golden, the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy, an anti-poverty organization that promotes effective federal and state policies. In addition, I bring to this testimony experience in directly administering safety net programs at the federal, state, and local levels, as well as studying them as a researcher at the Urban Institute. I will briefly summarize 3 main points from my written testimony. First, researchers have demonstrated that the nation's core safety net programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, SNAP, child care assistance, health insurance, sharply reduce poverty. They cut it almost in half. They improve nutrition and health care for millions of children and families. And this is really important emerging research, they have positive effects on children's health, work trajectory, and income many years later into adulthood. Just to take one example, SNAP benefits alone kept more than 10 million people, including almost 5 million children, out of poverty in 2012. Second key point, the research evidence indicates overwhelmingly that the safety net as a whole supports work, particularly for low-income parents. It is not too much support from the safety net, but too little, such as the absence of enough help with childcare that typically holds people back from working. While some individuals encounter barriers to work related to safety net programs, researchers find that these effects are much smaller than the program's work-promoting effects. And many past barriers have been fixed in recent years. I think Mr. Doggett alluded to the Medicaid improvements. In fact, the majority of people who get help from core safety net programs today are working, but earning too little to make ends meet without help. To take a moment to summarize the research, theories about work disincentives are just not supported by what researchers find about low-income families' actual experiences. Rigorous studies find that when low-income working parents can get and keep the full package of work support programs, they are better able to stabilize their lives, keep a job, move up, and help their children thrive. For example, studies of parents leaving welfare for work have concluded that families accessing these supports were more likely to be stably employed. Studies of the Earned Income Tax Credit show large effects in increasing labor force participation. And empirical studies of the effects of the safety net taken as a whole confirm that in practice, these programs' work disincentives are so small as to have, quote, almost no effect on their anti-poverty effectiveness. In fact, one of the major success stories of the past 2 decades is that the safety net has made work pay as a result of specific decisions by Congress and the states to improve work incentives. One striking piece of evidence: poor and near-poor mothers who are eligible for the widest range of safety net benefits have become far more likely to work than they used to be. By contrast, employment has declined among childless adults, the group with least access to the safety net. Finally, my testimony highlights practical next steps. I urge the members of the committees to consider 6 next steps that build on past success. First, extend the improvements to the Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit that now expire at the end of 2017. Second, expand the EITC to childless workers, including young adults, who now don't benefit from this work incentive. Third, expand funding for child care assistance, whose importance was recognized by a recent bipartisan reauthorization in the Congress. Fourth, fully fund implementation of another program reauthorized in a bipartisan manner, the nation's workforce programs, so low-income workers can move into family-supporting employment. Fifth, explore 2 generational strategies that help parents move up at work and enhance children's life chances at the same time. And sixth, avoid counterproductive ideas such as block grants that would turn back the demonstrated successes of the safety net. In conclusion, as a result of policy improvements over the last 2 decades, the major national safety net programs combine a strong impact on poverty with positive work incentives for low-income families. I urge you to consider building on this momentum with additional practical steps, such as those I've highlighted here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Golden. Next, we'll go to Dr. Sturley. You're recognized, Dr. Sturley.
Thank you, Chairperson Bustany and Pilarsky, Ranking Members Doggett and McGovern, Chairman Conaway, and Chairman Ryan, if he returns. I thank you for this opportunity to testify before you again. My name is Gene Sturley, and I've worked with you on many tax, budget, and welfare issues over time. And again, it's an honor to be here again. My remarks reflect my own views and not those of the institutions with which I am associated. Despite the rhetoric about living in an age of austerity, we live in a time of extraordinary opportunity. On a per-household basis, our income is higher ever than even before the Great Recession, and 60% higher, by the way, than when Ronald Reagan was elected president. The best options, in my view, for the future of a social welfare budget cannot possibly be determined well by the needs and parameters established decades ago in a very different economy and driving the programs we're talking about today. But 2 examples enlighten us as to how bipartisan efforts actually led to important forward-looking shifts from past policies. Republicans and Democrats did not always agree on the merits of either AFDC or the Earned Income Tax Credit, yet they did favor a shift from welfare toward wage subsidies. Ditto for moving from public housing to housing vouchers. To me, these give evidence that there are bipartisan ways of getting around the type of problem we're talking about today. I also sense that both the American public and you, their elected representatives, are united in wanting to create a 21st century social welfare budget. That budget, I believe, should and will place greater focus on opportunity, mobility, work, and investment in human, real, and financial capital. However, for the most part, we've never really had a social welfare budget that is focused on mobility and work. As I show in Dead Men Ruling, you hold an office at a time unique in our nation's history, a time when the politically unattractive option of reneging on promises the public feels it has been made has been turned into a requirement. Economic growth, even if modest, always provided new opportunities. It's just that you now operate within a budget where too many choices have already been preempted by dead and retired elected officials who continue to rule. For instance, projections by the Congressional Budget Office and others imply that government is scheduled to spend in excess of $1 trillion more annually in about 10 years. And by the way, those numbers come about whether you're dealing often with a Republican or a Democratic budget because they are derived from economic growth. Yet all of that money, plus some, has already been absorbed by other commitments that have been made. And the traditional source of flexibility in the budget has been removed. Now, one important component of the reform that's necessary, if we could reallocate those future resources, increased resources, would be the combined marginal tax rates imposed mainly on lower-income households and their potential negative effects on work, wealth accumulation, and marriage. To see how many programs combine to reduce the reward to work and marriage, I invite you to look at the first figures in my testimony. There I show that for households with children, combined marginal tax rates from direct taxes and universally available programs like the Earned Income Credit, SNAP, and health insurance average about 66% when moving from about $15,000 of income to about $55,000 of income. Typically when moving toward full-time work, taking a second job in the household, and particularly facing the very large penalties if you happen to marry another worker. Those beneficiaries of additional housing and welfare were not even included in this first figure. You add those in and the rates get up above 75% on average. Now add in items like transportation, consumption, and child care costs. Child care costs are dealt with quite clearly by the testimony by Ms. McCarkle, and the gains from work fall even more. Sometimes there are no gains at all. So while there is widespread disagreement on the size of these disincentive effects on work and marriage, there's little doubt that they do exist. One way out of this bind, as I keep trying to emphasize, would be to focus future increased resources more towards opportunity budget that emphasizes early childhood, quality teachers, work subsidies in lieu of more subsidies just for consumption, decent neighborhood environments, and similar items. Combined tax rates could also be made more explicit, and work can be made a stronger requirement to receive some benefits. And by the way, cutting health care costs plays a big role here too. I'd be glad to discuss these options further with you as the hearing proceeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sterling. And we now welcome Ms. McCorkle. We're glad you were able to make it. I know transportation can often be treacherous around here, but anyway, we certainly welcome you, and you may proceed with your testimony.
Hello, how's everyone today? Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Chanel McCorkle, and I am grateful to share my story. I moved to Baltimore in April 2011 with my daughter and her father. We were new to Baltimore and had no place to go. I moved in with my two sisters and was told about the City Homes program. I was told it was an organization that would help me find affordable housing for my family and me. The same day I applied, I was rejected. According to City Homes, I had not worked in the state for at least 18 months and therefore was ineligible for assistance. Forced to remain with my sisters, my next step was to go to the Department of Social Services for additional support. Fortunately, I was granted food stamps and medical assistance. I found a job at Rite Aid Pharmacy as a cashier making $9 an hour. When I let the Department of Social Service know of this job and my earnings, they dramatically lowered my food stamps. The $200 reduction made it difficult to make ends meet. 1 year later, I found a better opportunity as a grill chef at St. Joseph Hospital. The full-time position required me to find and maintain stable and reliable daycare from my 3-year-old daughter. I again went to the Department of Social Service for help. I applied for daycare vouchers and was turned down. I was informed that $11 per hour was too high of an income to receive vouchers. I was forced to rely on friends, family, and neighbors to babysit while I worked. I found myself bouncing my daughter around from place to place, from person to person, in order to keep my job. After a while, the holes in my daycare situation became more and more apparent as friends and family were not able to commit full-time due to their own work obligations. I struggled with my attendance every day, and over the course of 2 years, I was calling out weekly due because I had no sitter for my child and I could not afford to pay a child care center. In 2012, I became pregnant with my son, and after he was born, I needed additional help with child care. I added him to my social service case and still was not eligible for daycare vouchers. I was eventually let go from St. Joseph Hospital for missing too many days of work. After I lost my job, I applied for temporary cash assistance through the Department of Social Services. 30 days after I applied, I was granted cash assistance and immediately received daycare vouchers and an increase in food stamps assistance. The daycare vouchers I so desperately needed while I was working were finally granted to me after it cost me my job. I was also placed with America Works of Maryland, Incorporated. American Works taught me how to dress professionally, answer interview questions, format a resume, and seek current and worthwhile job opportunities. I feel like I had to lose my job in order for social service to really help me. I have recently accepted a job working 40 hours per week with excellent benefits. I'm really excited to return to work. I know that after the Department of Social Service gets notified, I will lose some, if not all, of my benefits, and that's scary. I'm sure they will take my daycare vouchers from me or make the co-payment too high, my food stamps will be decreased or non-existent, and my medical benefits may end. I have tried to make provisions if those things should happen. I have just started to get back on track, and I know I am well on my way, no matter how much of an uphill battle it may be. I'm fighting to get back to work, to support my family, and become an independent once again. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. McCorkle, for sharing your story with us. For the members, we have 3 votes. There's about 9.5 minutes left. We're going to continue for a while longer, and then we'll recess for votes when we get down a little further on the clock. With that, Ms. Nettis, you may proceed with your testimony.
Chairman Bosney, Chairman Walski, thank you for the opportunity to speak before the committee today. I would also like to thank the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Paul Ryan and the rest of the distinguished committee members. My name is Marcia Nettis. I am the Vice President and General Manager of America Works of Maryland, Incorporated. It is my pleasure to testify before you today. America Works was founded in 1984 and was the first for-profit company dedicated to helping individuals become self-sufficient through employment and retention services. Founder Peter Cove and President and CEO Dr. Lee Bowes made it their life mission to improve workforce development programming by connecting socially deemed hard-to-serve job seekers with private sector employment. In 1997, the Maryland office, located in downtown Baltimore, was opened with the goal to help longtime welfare recipients find unsubsidized employment. Since then, the Maryland office has expanded its services to assist even harder to serve populations, such as violent ex-offenders who have been incarcerated for at least 1 year, longtime SSI or SSDI beneficiaries, disabled veterans, and youth aging out of foster care. Collectively, we have placed over 10,000 people into stable employment. Our networks of employers rely on us to connect them with qualified individuals eager to work. I have been part of this branch since its inception, witnessing the implementation of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act, through the transition to the Deficit Reduction Act of 2005. Through my observation, regardless of the population served, Chanel's testimony demonstrates a true reality for those facing upward mobility. Fear is linked to the reality of the clients we serve. Even when finding clients to testify before you today on their realities of life, fear surfaced among them that retribution could occur, making an already difficult situation worse, like sanctions for choosing to be selective with employment. Individuals will turn down a job for fear their other support services could be interrupted. Here you have Chanel, a single mother of raising 2 young children, highly motivated to work, but apprehensive of taking full-time employment because although she will earn a livable wage, her daycare copay and the loss of food stamps could keep her in the same socioeconomic status as before employment. When I met Chanel, she was elated to share she was hired at the new Amazon distribution center in Baltimore, a 40-hour-week job with excellent benefits, but gravely concerned that this opportunity could result in a repeat of the past. She had great jobs before, decent wages, good benefits, and chances to create a career path for her family, but lost them because although it sounds like a good situation, the reality is she still needed transitional assistance. Although she's excited about this new opportunity, she's feeling a bit leery about her outcome. Will this really be the chance to get off the system? Although our retention team will provide her with the guidance and supports needed to succeed, certain supplements are simply out of our control. Clients have declined good jobs for fear it could affect their extended supports, such as housing, childcare, medical assistance, and food stamps. As wages increase, the likelihood of the client contributing more equally increases. Our experience has found that there are others that will just take the opportunity, eager and determined to provide more for their families, only to result in being terminated because the reality is they are still reliant on public assistance, like daycare vouchers. Without a true support system, they cannot make it work. Sadly, once their earnings exceed a federally defined hardship amount, they no longer qualify for assistance, and in all likelihood, it may be eliminated altogether. This could be the case for Chanel. Despair enters their world, and my staff and I aggressively work to instill hope back into their lives. This is even more challenging for those who have gone through specialized training programs.
Ms. Nettis, because of the vote schedule, can I get you to wrap up on your oral testimony? We have your full written testimony.
Sure.
On the record. Thank you.
Often at a financial cost to themselves, never resulting in employment, yet alone earnings initially marketed to them. America Works has developed several programs where skills development is in direct correlation with private sector needs, providing the individual with not only the theory aspect of the job, but the realistic experience of understanding. I petitioned the committee to truly evaluate the transitional process and support systems for helping low-income working families leave the welfare system. Unfortunately, the priority is aimed at ensuring full participation of work activity, as defined by the law to not accrue penalties, instead of a system designed to guarantee stable employment. Through our experiences, we know people want to work. With proper matching, there is a job for everyone, but we need an unmitigated system to ensure longevity of employment, which will result in reduction of the welfare rolls. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you, Ms. Nettis. I'll inform members that we have just over a minute left on the vote. If members do want to break out to vote, there are 3 votes. And when we do recess for the vote, we'll come promptly back and resume the hearing. So with that, I'll begin questioning of our witnesses. We'll go through a round of questions. These programs, we have a myriad of welfare programs that have been created over a course of years. They were individually designed to help families in need. But the collective effect of this, as we've heard in testimony, can discourage people from working and make them actually financially worse off because of cliffs and the things that we've heard about. Ms. McCorkle, your story is very compelling and very helpful to us, to give us a real-life example of what happens, because our goal is to help individuals like yourself who are trying to do the right thing, working hard day in and day out to do the right thing, taking a job, trying to get ahead, trying to improve, but we want to make sure that these programs work appropriately and don't penalize you when you try to do the right thing. So, I mean, in your opinion, how are we doing based on your experience?
Based on my experience, I feel like you're doing okay. I just feel like you should allow more time. Don't just snatch the benefits away from the client because they found the jobs. Give like a couple months to get yourself together. If you didn't save money, give you time to save your money, give you time to just get yourself established, and then decide if you're making enough money and you can handle it, then go ahead and take it off. Don't take it all the way away, just knock it down a little bit until they're established enough to actually get off the system.
So as you were looking to go back to work, were you afraid that you might end up worse off? Did you encounter fear, or were you concerned? And then once you went back to work, did you feel like, well, this is not working out for me? I'm worse off? Is that the case?
When I wasn't working, I feel like everything was okay. I went back to work. I feel like I was worried because the hours I was working, you couldn't find a daycare open for those hours, and then you couldn't pay the costs, and then you had to find people. But then if the people didn't work out for you, you had to call out, so I was worried. So I'm not working now, but I do start my new job tomorrow. I'm back. I'm excited. But at the same time, I'm worried about losing the vouchers or having the copay too high. You just start getting paid, so how are you going to pay your copay? And then you have to pay somebody to watch your kids. So it's actually like a worry. And then they're going to cut your food stamps. So who's to say you made enough to put enough food in your house for your kids?
Did you feel like you were in a trap?
It kind of does, yes.
Okay.
It does.
Well, thank you. Your story is very strong. It's a very helpful story to us because it's a real-life example of what we're trying to deal with as we coordinate these programs. Individually, the intentions have been good over time to create a good safety net, but the problem is the way these programs have interacted, I think they're not fair to individuals like yourself. And so the whole purpose of this and coordinating with the other committee is to try to figure out how we can better make these programs work for those that they're intended to help. Dr. Sturley, this problem, I assume you would answer yes, that this problem calls for a national answer. This is a national problem. It's federal policy interacting with state policy, but we need, certainly guidance from Congress as we clean this up.
I think that's correct, Chairman Bastani. And, part of the issue, as you say, this issue has arisen over the years and the decades, and the question is whether there's any quick fix. Part of what I'm trying to lay out in my testimonies is if we think ahead 15, 20 years, when resources of the economy are going to be greater, we can, I think we have an established base to provide people minimum levels of consumption. I think we can start moving on this particular problem. So for instance, primary education, we don't think of it creating marriage penalties and work disincentives. There's a lot of things we do. Visiting nursing programs that a number of people are engaged in. The other issue, which nobody wants to address a lot of this has arisen jurisdictionally when spending used to be determined by the expenditure committees and taxes were basically paying for public goods. Now that we have about $35,000 on average per household in transfers coming from the government, now the tax writing committees do transfers, the spending committees do taxes. And so I think there's a jurisdictional issue too that you're trying to address by having this joint committee of how you can make joint decisions about these issues. And I don't think that's resolved at all.
Right, yeah. Well, I think we're just getting started on that, and hopefully we will be able to clear up a lot of this. But then the other issue is, how do you empower those closest to those in need, working with the states and people at the state level to coordinate those efforts? Because we have to do work up here, but we also have work at the state level, since these are combined programs.
So I have a lot of options in my testimony, but one of them is to think about giving at the state level. If you don't want, there's this debate about whether you actually give grants to the states, but you could give state workers more flexibility to say combine some of the programs, provide the same level of benefits, say to somebody who's getting these benefits, but merge them in a different way. Maybe they need transportation. Maybe they're willing to sacrifice something to education to create a little more of those types of options, I think.
More of a customized casework approach, perhaps, with the flexibility built in.
I think in conjunction with the client.
Yeah, Ms. Golden, quickly, because I have to run the vote.
I was just going to comment on Ms. McCorkle's situation and your courage. First of all, you should be reassured. Given the numbers in Maryland, you should end up with your income almost doubling. And that's because of one thing that's federal, just to highlight the committee's jurisdiction, the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. But second, I want to highlight your concern about child care, which again goes to that federal-state relationship, is an enormous issue for mothers across the country. And the challenge there, I think, is not flexibility, but money. The state of Maryland does enable people who leave welfare to stay on child care, but you couldn't get on before when you were working because they have a waiting list. And that's because, flexibility or not, they just need those resources and they can't stretch them far enough. So I think that's a piece of the federal-state dynamic.
Thank you. I'm going to have to recess the hearing now. We have votes. We have 3 votes. We will resume immediately upon concluding the last vote. So with that, the committee stands recessed. Have a seat, we'll get you started. The subcommittee will now resume proceedings, and given that I've concluded my questioning of the witnesses, I'll now turn to Ms. Pilarsky for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Bustani. And again, thank you to the panel for being here. Ms. McCorkle, I didn't get a chance to say hi when you came in, and we just came back from votes, but thank you so much for being here and testifying, and Ms. Nettis as well, accompanying her. We have all the experts here. We've seen the graphs, so we've studied this, but you're the one that's actually lived through this process. And so, you know, we've been talking about this cliff, this welfare cliff. And so my question to you is, do you think the welfare cliff is real? And if so, can you just talk about the challenges of this whole process of reentering the workforce?
Yes, I believe the cliff is real. It is what I'm experiencing. The process of going through work is, it's really easy to find the job. It's really easy to get the job. It's just really hard to keep the job if you don't have the support you need to help with childcare, and childcare is being a big issue, then it's kind of hard to keep your job.
And so, Ms. Nettis, if you could also kind of fill in here and with what your organization does and kind of like tying this network and this web together. So is Ms. McCorkle an exception to the rule? Do you see this pretty much as a kind of like a new phenomena of this cliff?
Chanel is actually, she is common. Most of the people coming through the door that have moved on into permanent employment, as I stated earlier, are very fearful because not only Chanel, her greatest fear is childcare. I have a number of participants whose fear is housing. The moment they start working, their housing expenses start to rise. We also have a number of individuals that deal with just food stamps, as Chanel mentioned as well too, that once they start working, the month after, their food stamps are more than likely adjusted.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
I need to pause you there. Mr. Sterling, I just have a really quick follow-up on something that you said as well, when you talked about governors and changing mindsets and things like that. What can local and state governments do? What kind of role can they play in this whole mobility issue?
I don't know what they can do directly. I do sense, as I responded to Chairman Bustani, I think we could give them more options to think about combining or merging programs, or giving, say, a recipient is eligible for a given level of benefits, to take that level of benefits and split it some other ways, maybe for transportation or education or something. Maybe they're willing to accept a little bit less food stamps. The complication is, in a lot of cases, they don't have the jurisdiction. There's a huge jurisdictional splits. There's not, it's also an issue that my colleagues have dealt with a lot. There's not one-stop shopping for the client as well. So there's all sorts of coordination. I mean, one thing you might try to provide incentives for is just figure out ways to get these data sets together so we can actually even figure out what's going on at state and local levels.
I appreciate it, and my time is up. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Now I yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, and thanks to each of you for your important testimony. I am pleased to note that as you've been testifying, Chief Justice Roberts, writing for 6 members of the United States Supreme Court, has upheld the health care security of many of the people that we are talking about right now. As he wrote, quote, "Congress passed the Affordable Care Act to improve health insurance markets, not to destroy them." And he rejected the rejectionist argument that he said would, quote, "likely create the very death spirals that Congress designed the act to avoid." So I hope that as we address the issues that you're raising in your important testimony, that we will learn from the Affordable Care Act, we will cease the 60-plus attempts to repeal it, and get about the business of how we improve and strengthen it, and as it relates to this whole question of cliffs, how we can learn from the important legislative changes that were made in the Affordable Care Act. Let me ask you, Ms. Golden, and I appreciate your answer to the last question, to talk a little more about what I refer to as the blockheaded approach of giving states like Texas that are rejectionist states that have rejected the Affordable Care Act, despite the 800,000 Texans that are benefiting already from these marketplaces and the many more who could benefit from an expansion of Medicare. what the likely effect is of providing Texas and other such states a block grant, and how block granting programs like SNAP are giving the states the option of pushing multiple programs into one block grant program. What will that likely actually do for the working poor, for the people that are out there struggling with 2 or 3 jobs but don't really have a living wage? Would you turn your...
We know a lot about the disadvantages of block grants, that they risk turning back the successes of the safety net and making the work issues worse. You note the state choice around Medicaid. Ms. McCorkle doesn't have to worry about her health insurance because Maryland made the right choice on Medicaid expansion. In Texas, she would have to worry about it. So a couple things about block grants. One is that they, in every case I can think of in the poverty and human services area, they go down over time. TANF is down by 40%. Child care, my written testimony says we're serving, the fewest people we have for a dozen years. And not only do they go down over time, they don't respond to economic trouble. So during the recession, when family need was greatest for those struggling low-income working people, SNAP and Medicaid responded to that need, kept people access to health insurance and food. TANF as a block grant did not. As you know, they raised the big problem of differences by state. So that the benefits for children that I talked about depend on where a child is born. And the fourth thing, which I think is a very big issue, they don't solve the problem that's been identified today. If the state of Maryland, which we were just hearing about, is not able to provide sufficient child care benefits to make sure that people are able to keep that for a long time, or to get it when they're in low-wage work, that's not about flexibility. It's not that that family needs child care instead of health care coverage for their kids. It's about dollars. And the Congress has come to a bipartisan reauthorization of child care legislation. There's money proposed by the authorizing committee for that. There's a proposal by the president in his budget for expanding dollars. Child care is very flexible. States get to make lots of choices about how to spend it, but flexibility doesn't compensate for not having the resources to meet the needs you've got.
We'll now go to Mr. McGovern.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your answer to Mr. Doggett's question, because I think, I think we want to be clear here. That when people are talking about block granting programs, they're not talking about expanding the resources that states have to be able to do more. Earlier, I think Ms. Nettis was talking about Ms. McCorkle's issue with daycare, but that was a problem with the daycare block grant in Maryland. My colleague from Illinois, Mr. Davis, if he comes back, might be able to respond with some information about how Illinois is doing a better job with their daycare block grant. But it points out, I think, that how states have to make tough choices when it comes to block grants that are, that don't mean that we're expanding resources. And I think, on the issue of the cliff, I understand, because I've bumped into people, who have told me their stories, but the challenge is, the problem they talk about is that, the benefits end too soon. They would like them to continue. I think I think we should have that discussion. But let's be honest, that's going to require additional resources. Which I think, I don't know where the mindset of the current leadership in this Congress is, but it's probably not in that direction. But Ms. Golden, I mentioned in my opening statement that I think if you work in this country, you ought not to have to live in poverty. And it infuriates me that, that there are too many workers in this country who earn such abysmally low wages that we tolerate here, and in some cases even encourage by some of our policies here. But these people still qualify for a lot of these benefits, including SNAP. The American taxpayer is subsidizing low-wage work in this country. Can you talk about how raising the minimum wage to a livable wage might actually help people transition off of SNAP? Because a livable wage is what we want here. It's not just getting people into the workforce. We're doing that, and people are still so poor. How could that help here?
So I'm glad you raised that, because one of the things I highlight in my testimony is that the problem for low-wage workers is a lot about the labor market. The public safety net programs are doing a lot of what they need to do very successfully, but when you look at, say, kids in poverty, 70% of them are living with someone who works, a third of them are living with someone who works full-time, full year. So the issues are wages that are too low, and hours that are insufficient, and jobs that are transient and impermanent. So addressing the problem of wages essentially offers the opportunity for someone to raise kids and work in a family-sustaining setting. And I want to note that I think it also probably makes it easier for them to move up beyond that, because we do a lot of work at CLASP also on workforce training, post-secondary education, and if you're trying to balance work, school, and raising kids, having enough income from the work piece so that you can do the whole thing is virtually impossible at the minimum wage. So I think that that's a very important piece.
May I interject, Mr. Chairman, and answer that same question?
Briefly.
When we modeled the welfare cliff in Illinois, actually increasing the minimum wage would not help the family that we looked at. Because if you actually take a look at the charts that's provided in the data, that if a person moves from the minimum wage up to $12 per hour, that it's relatively flat. There's not much advantage at all. If you raise it beyond that, you push them off the cliff so that they're actually harmed.
And by the way, I'm talking about a livable wage.
The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Young, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, I've long been intrigued by what has become a very popular formulation. I think JFK first said it, or at least it first caught fire when he said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And I think that generally is the case. We need to do those macroeconomic things like reform our tax code, reduce the number of burdensome regulations and so forth so that that tide can rise. But I think it's clear now when you look at the data, when you visit with enough people, that there are some boats that require patching. And I see a unique role, not necessarily for the federal government, in many cases for state governments to tailor programs to unique needs of, say, the state of Indiana, where I hail from, as opposed to Massachusetts or California. I also see a real role for what still to this day is the most vibrant civil society in human history. And Mr. Randolph, perhaps you could speak to some of those interventions we've seen at the state level, the local level. Our churches are not-for-profits. What role do they have in ensuring that people get back to work and enter sort of the path to upward mobility?
Yes, thank you. I think you are right. If we really want to solve the problem and really help people, you want to involve these nonprofit organizations. A number of them are faith-based, and they can be extremely helpful. There's a number of them around the country that they call pathways. I think it's Pathways Out of Poverty, and they actually provide coaching and a number of things to help individuals come out. Did I understand your question correctly? Did I answer it correctly?
You did indeed.
Okay.
And you know, the purpose of this program this hearing rather, is to investigate some of the distortions that are created by our government programs, the disincentives created for someone going back to work. So I was particularly struck by your example. I think the calculations you made were someone from Lake County, Indiana, single parent, working at $12 an hour, which amounts to $22,000 a year, would rationally say, no, I'm not going to take this $18 an hour job offer which amounts to $40,000 a year because you know, it's I would end up losing money in the whole course of this sort of calculation, and this is an abomination and something we need to solve here.
You're correct again.
Yeah.
I mean, just think of it from the point of view of that single parent. I mean, they have children to take care of, and their decision is going to be in the best interest of their family and their children. So if we put them in a position where they have to turn down a higher paying job, then that's wrong. And it happened. I mean, it happened in Maryland, but it happens in other places. It happens in Illinois. It happens in Pennsylvania. I actually helped manage a focus group in Pennsylvania that looked at some of these issues, and we heard a number of different stories that said that basically the same thing.
So 2 tracks here, patching the boats and removing the disincentives created by the federal government. I think we'll be in a better spot. I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Next, we'll go to Mrs. Fudge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'm not even sure where I want to begin today, but let me just say this about the historic nature of this hearing today. The only thing that's historic is that we have spent about 6 or 7 various hearings on SNAP. We've spent almost that many on child nutrition, just as if there is nothing else going on in the world or in this Congress. That's what's historic, that we have spent so much time beating one issue to death. I sit and I listen to people talk about how people calculate whether they're going to take a job making $18 an hour from one making 11 because they're going to lose it. The average person has no clue what the value of their benefits are. They don't sit and make that kind of a calculation. And there is nothing that you can say to give me any data that they do, other than what you've said to them. There is nothing, there is no proof anywhere that being on public assistance discourages work. There is no proof of it. It's just something that people want to talk about. Absolutely no proof. Maybe what we should be discussing is ways to lift people out of poverty by raising the minimum wage, extending paid sick and family leave for all workers so that their parents don't have to risk losing their jobs to take care of a sick child or a parent. And we need to be talking about enhancing and permanently extending tax credits for working families. But maybe what we should talk about is corporate welfare. What is their disincentive? They get more money from the federal government than all the poor people that you're talking about. Why don't we talk about corporate welfare? These are people who work every day. They're not lazy, but they get corporate welfare. Even in the tax code, it calls it an entitlement. But we never talk about them. We only talk about poor people. And at some point, you just have to say to yourself, what is the point? What is it that we're trying to do? We're talking about SNAP that's in a farm bill. We passed a farm bill. It was a 5-year farm bill. Why are we talking about it? It's done. I just don't understand why we are wasting this kind of time. Ms. Golden, could you tell me why you think you were here today, really?
I think that, so first of all, may I just support your point that these facts don't make sense to you? Because I think we have looked at some of the calculations in Mr. Randolph's report, and the housing calculation, in fact, it doesn't work that way. People don't get pushed off when their income hits. They stay on. They just can't come in new at that level. So I think one of the lessons is many theoretical calculations, in fact, aren't true to the way the programs happen on the ground. In terms of the reason for this hearing, well, I'll tell you my hope. I won't tell you what I would worry about. My hope is that we're here to talk about the extraordinary successes of the safety net, like the fact that we've sharply reduced poverty, we've ensured that the safety net supports work for the vast majority of low-income people, and that we're getting evidence about how it supports children's lifelong effectiveness. And then maybe we'll talk about some of the practical next steps that you highlighted that the committees could take, like extending the earned income tax credit further, like increasing investment in child care. So those would be my hopes for what would come out of it.
I thank the gentlelady. Next, we will go to Mr. Davis. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for letting us poor Ag Committee members come into such a nice, spacious hearing room. We know how good you have it here on Ways and Means now.
You only have 3 minutes. Get to your questions.
I'm not yielding back. Actually, I just want to welcome my friend, Mr. Randolph from the great state of Illinois. It was nice that my colleague, Mr. McGovern, was interested in some of the policies that are being implemented in Illinois, and I can't wait to have that discussion with him in a future hearing. I appreciate your work and your discussion on the cliff that you're talking about. As somebody who's a supporter of SNAP programs, I want to make sure that those who need benefits get them, and that those who are on those benefits have the ability to transition into that workplace and not have to make a decision between getting benefits or getting a higher wage. You've talked about the cliff. Now I want to hear some of your suggestions that we might be able to take into consideration in this institution on how to make it better. What can we do to fix it? So I would ask you that. What can we do to fix some of the problems that you've identified?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we got to keep in mind that what's important is that we're talking about these single moms, we're talking about these families that want to help their lives. So we shouldn't we shouldn't get jealous of jurisdiction or federal control over the states. So I think the important thing is to rise above that and then realize that if we're going to really solve the problem, we have to allow flexibility at the state level for them to address. And just this past Monday, I was at, did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just this past Monday, I was at a group where there are 20 different secretaries of human services across this country, and they all were telling me the same thing, and that is that if they are given more flexibility, there's more things that they can do to manage these programs better.
What are some of the, what are a couple of examples that you can give as to how they're managing those programs better? What can we do in a state like Illinois to do exactly what you're talking about?
Right. What I would like to see is I would like to see that, like, for example, in the SNAP program, that there's flexibility, that the funds could be fungible with other welfare programs, so that when you're at a state level, you look at the person and you say, okay, you have these various needs. Right now, we can't move any of the SNAP money over to child care. We can't move the child care money over here. If you would blend the programs together, similar to the document put together for the Opportunities Grants, that would be a great way to allow states to have flexibility to better serve the needs of the individuals and the families.
Great. My time has expired. I'll yield back my 1 second, but I look forward to working with you, Mr. Randolph.
I thank the gentleman. Next, we'll go to Mr. Ashford.
Thank you, and I'm not sure who to direct this question to exactly, but maybe to Ms. Golden. Back in Nebraska, I served as an executive director of the Omaha Housing Authority, and one of for 3 years, and one of the real tragedies of that experience was that halfway through my tenure there, the self-sufficiency program at the Housing Authority, at HUD, was defunded. So essentially what the rule was is, look, you're a housing agency, you're not a employment agency, you're not a workforce agency. And actually in Nebraska, we passed welfare reform. It was my bill. It was 1994, one of the early welfare reform bills prior to 1996. And in that bill, and as a result of it, we've reduced, as has been the case generally, have reduced welfare rolls. I thought that Chairman Ryan was absolutely correct when he said, I don't know how we structure all of these things, but when we look at the numbers that we're seeing today are the same numbers, not the same numbers, but the same kinds of percentages to a certain degree that I've been seeing since 1986, as long as I've been in public life. And it is frustrating because it seems to me that the issue, and the 80 programs are out there, and there's still a lot of people in poverty, and clearly in running and I'll shut up here, clearly running the Housing Authority, I learned the cliff is dramatic. It's absolutely dramatic. And there are so many young families that stayed in the Housing Authority generationally also, not because they didn't want to work or be part of the workforce, but because they could not get out. And so I'm on the side of anything that will enhance workforce. I also noticed in CNBC this morning they listed the states that were the most viable economic states in the country, and one of the states that had moved up dramatically to number one actually was Minnesota because of the indicia being workforce investment. So I guess my question is no matter how we structure TANF or how we structure food stamps, if we don't figure out a way, the first job is not a job that will make it for these families. So we've got to enhance incomes as fast as possible, and that can only come from job training. And could you respond to that? I mean, this is the most frustrating issue in my whole professional life I've ever been involved in, because it's not working the way it should be right now.
So let me highlight the job. You've raised a lot of issues. Let me start with the job training one, which I think is really important. So one of the things Congress did in a bipartisan way in 2014 was pass a reauthorization of the nation's workforce programs. but not put additional dollars into it. And so that's another point where there are many positive things in that law. For example, one of the past challenges of that law was that it didn't really focus on, above all, on the low-income, low-skilled people you're talking about. And the Congress changed the incentives in order to make it more. So I actually think that focusing a lot on that and the nutrition subcommittee, of course, in the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, the 10 employment and training pilots, that's another opportunity to really get that right. And just, I'm sorry, sir, you were going to say something.
No, I'm not. I'm leaning forward. I'm sorry.
Well, the other thing that I guess two things I want to say looking forward. One is I do think the workforce legislation and the opportunities there are crucial. Second, I think that, you know, I've spent a lot of my career at the state and local level and worked a lot with states, and I think there are big opportunities for states to seize these moments, but Snappy and T is an example. They have lots of flexibility. They don't draw it down, so they need to see the importance of doing that. On the cliffs, I would just note that I think there has been important progress you described since 1986, and an example is that back then there was essentially no child care resources, but what's happened is that families are working more than ever in struggling low-wage jobs, and so adding the capacity to address the cliffs, I think, is needed to solve it too.
The gentleman's time has expired. We'll next go to Mr. Dold. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for taking your time to come and testify before us today. And I want to thank the chairman for holding this joint hearing, because the topic that we're talking about is very important. We have 80 or so different programs that are out there right now, our welfare programs, and we want to make sure that these dollars are actually stretching the furthest they possibly can. And ultimately our goal is that we want to make sure that people aren't on welfare, that they're able to get up and out of welfare and stand on their own 2 feet, raise their families, and carry out the lives as they choose. Coming from the great state of Illinois, Mr. Randolph, we certainly appreciate your work at the Illinois Policy Institute. I wanted to follow up on some of the things that you had talked about before. The study that you had mentioned before was done in Lake County, Illinois. That happens to be an area that I represent. I think the study that you did was talking about a single mother with 2 children and the differential between making $12 an hour and the benefits that family would receive versus what I think most people would think would be a natural evolution to say, okay, I'm doing well, I'd like to get that raise and get a raise in $18 an hour, and ultimately that would be economically a detriment to that family. Can you kind of talk to, in your experience, you know, is that a common thing that we're seeing, that cliff?
I think it is common. This is something that people face. I mean, we have a panelist here who has a similar situation that she encountered. You know, we see it. You know, we studied 3 counties in Illinois, and it was true for all 3 of those counties. So my answer would be, I believe it is common. It is a real issue, and I'm very happy that you're holding this hearing to try to solve it.
Well, and that's one of the things that I hope we can get, and obviously we've got a very short period of time, but we'd like to get some solutions. This isn't just an opportunity for us to talk. We're hopefully highlighting a scenario that's out there that's a problem that we need to fix, and we need your help to come up with some solutions, because we don't want to discourage that individual from getting the raise, from trying to pull themselves out of poverty to try to better their family. Ms. Nettis, let me just ask you, from your experience working firsthand with individuals, do you think that the people are generally aware of the phase-out rates for the programs that they receive and are disincentivized to work for advancement?
I think they're very familiar with it. I mean, amongst just talking to each other, they can hear what's going on out there. Often they are finding out these situations a little too late. By the time they take the job, they now get a letter in the mail that says your benefits are going to expire. So, yeah, I think they are familiar with it, and I think that once one person goes through it, they tend to share it with the others. And so Chanel is a perfect example of someone who has gone through it, and she's going to talk to her peers. And true enough, you know, they'll be able to make decisions based on that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. And what I will hope, and I do hope, is that we can figure out a way to make sure that our safety net, that our welfare programs don't disincentivize people from trying to get themselves out. That needs to be all of our goal because we want that social safety net. But when we've created it in such a way where there's a disincentive to advance, I think we all lose. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. Next, we'll go to Ms. Delbonnay from Washington State.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you for being with us today and for taking the time. This Congress, the Agriculture Committee, has been conducting what's been billed as a top-to-bottom review of programs like SNAP. And the title of today's hearing, How Welfare Benefits Can Discourage Work, makes me think that not enough of us have been listening. SNAP doesn't discourage work. If anything, we've learned that the benefits aren't adequate enough. Ms. Golden, your testimony talks about available workforce development funding in SNAP employment and training that is only used by a handful of states. In fact, my home state of Washington is one of the leaders in ENT programs. I introduced a bill last Congress that was the basis for $200 million in new SNAP ENT pilot programs in the Farm Bill. And I'm definitely proud that these pilots are based in part on criteria from Washington State's program that's helped participants achieve self-sufficiency. As you know, these programs differ widely in participation and success across the states, but even at the height of the recession, 60% of those enrolled in Washington's ENT programs found employment, and in one study, less than half remained on government assistance 2 years after starting the program. So I was wondering, Ms. Golden, can you further explain how ENT programs promote, not discourage work when jobs are available?
Sure. I mean, I think I would highlight a couple of things you said and then build on them. You highlighted the way SNAP encourages, not discourages work, and its effect in stabilizing people's lives so they can work and move up. And second, the role of employment and training programs, because the big barrier for the low-income person trying to make that jump is typically going to be about getting the promotion, having the skills, in doing the bipartisan workforce reauthorization that the Congress did, both parties said, really a post-secondary credential is likely to be crucial for moving up. So that puts employment and training front and center. And Washington State, as you say, is a leader. What the Farm Bill includes, in addition to the unlimited matching funds that exist for employment and training that in SNAP, that, as I said, many states are not seriously drawing down, it adds pilots, 10 pilots, which ought to create lessons about doing this really, really well. And one of the things we're excited about is that there's been a lot of innovation in the employment and training arena, community colleges, workforce programs, but it isn't necessarily known to SNAP agencies. And so building that connection, using those pilots so that people can make that leap, I think is a very exciting next step.
And in the end, we should be focused on the results we're seeing in our state. We've seen strong results from these programs, and hopefully the pilots will give us innovative new ideas that different states are trying that continue to inform everyone in programs.
Absolutely, and the issue for states is not the flexibility to do those things. They have that. It's having the ideas and making them work.
No, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Mr. Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of the panelists for your presence here. Mr. Randolph, I thank you for your testimony and your submitted testimony as well. And I know one of the things that you introduced was a chart that described activity in my own home state of Pennsylvania, in which you had done some work. And curiously, you were able to identify a circumstance in which a single mother who was better off earning an income of gross income of $29,000 with $57,000 in net income and benefits than to be earning $69,000 with a net income and benefits of $57,000. Could you elaborate what you meant by that in the chart?
Certainly. Now, that chart that you're referring to was an earlier version of the same computational model. The one in Illinois is actually more sophisticated. And that was when I worked at Pennsylvania's Department of Public Welfare when that was developed. And what was discovered with that model was that it's the same cliff effect. It's essentially the same thing that it turned out in Illinois, that someone can earn up to a certain point, that they earn some sort of salary, but once they would earn more or have the potential to earn more, they lose benefits. So it's the same trap. It's the same cliff effect. It's in Pennsylvania and it's in Illinois.
Well, I thank you for describing, the cliff issue, which is one of the things we're looking about. But how are those affected by changing circumstances, and particularly a lot of the times, and I think some of the time you were looking, the issue of a recession. We have economies that aren't flat, they're cyclical. And during the period of time when I was in Pennsylvania, looking at this particular issue, we actually saw an expansion of the activities supporting, in my own Montgomery County, 118% increase in the total number of persons receiving SNAP and 173% increase in children receiving SNAP. But these were children, and this was during a period of time in which, notwithstanding the fact that some of them may have been put back into jobs, the nature of the job was that the wages were such that they weren't sufficiently escaping poverty to the point that they were able to also escape the need for the assistance for the food. Can you give me some insights about how a recession affects things?
Well, yes. I mean, we have the safety net for situations, and certainly during times of recession, economic recessions, more people are going to need it. Much of what my model was looking at, however, is the ladder that people have to climb, the opportunity ladder or the career ladder, if you will. And what's happened is there's a whole bunch of rungs kicked out. So they climb up maybe a third way up the ladder, and now they can't reach the next step. And that is what what my understanding that we're trying to solve. That's what the modeling that we have done has shown. It has shown that the way the current system is designed, and it's a hodgepodge, if you will. It's been designed, haphazardly. No one person is at fault, but you have a bunch of programs and you kind of layer one on top of the other, and the aggregate effect is that you have rungs kicked out of the ladder and people get stuck only a third way up.
Well, I thank you. My time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll next go to Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony today. I've talked about this issue for a long time, and of course, poverty is pretty high in North Carolina. People are working hard every day, 2 and 3 jobs, but working hard is not enough if you don't make enough. According to Feeding America, the 12th District of North Carolina, which is the district I represent, ranks 9th in the nation for food insecurity with a percent of over 26%. And I have serious concerns about efforts to block grant the SNAP program, and I'm pleased that North Carolina is participating in the Work Support Strategies initiatives to make applying for SNAP and other safety net programs more efficient, both for families that want to work and for state government. Ms. Golden, can you elaborate on how the Work Supportive Strategies initiative helps families get back to work in North Carolina, and how it benefits families applying for SNAP while also saving the government money?
Sure. I'm glad you highlighted that, because Work Support Strategies Initiative, which is a foundation-funded initiative that we're leading at CLASP with 2 other national partners, we're working with 6 states trying to do exactly what you say, deliver Medicaid, SNAP, and child care subsidies using the flexibility that's already there, not anything that would need new laws, to work well for working families. And as you mentioned, North Carolina, the others are Republican and Democratic governor states, Colorado, Idaho, Illinois, North Carolina, South Carolina, Rhode Island. And what I would highlight is that one of the big things that the states have been doing is getting rid of barriers that are not in policy. They're certainly not in federal policy. Sometimes they're in state policy that were keeping working families out. Like if in North Carolina, if you used to have to stand in 2 separate lines for a whole day to be able to take care of your health care and your nutrition needs, then if you were working a low-wage job where you were going to be fired or miss your paycheck for missing hours, you were not going to be able to get that help, and that was going to destabilize your family. So what these states are doing is taking advantage of the existing flexibility to deliver it better. They do, as you say, save some administrative dollars because they're able to use information and data they've already got rather than having to process things multiple times over. But it's crucial to them that they have the Medicaid and SNAP structures as they are now, because that's how you can get the benefits to people quickly. So I think that's a great example of flexibility that exists now.
Okay, thank you. As a follow-up, how is service delivery designed to not be a hindrance to working families, and how is the program structured to encourage families to work without disproportionately losing benefits?
Well, I think both SNAP and health benefits, so starting with SNAP. So first of all, it's key that it's not a block grant program. It doesn't require somebody to spend hours interviewing you before you get your help with your nutrition. It is a program that responds to recessions. I think Mr. Meehan highlighted that. So when somebody needs the help, it can happen based on a determination of their eligibility that you can do very quickly and in an automated way. SNAP also is important as a work support because of the gradual way that dollars phase out. So it takes into account the fact that you'll have more expenses when you work, and that gets taken into account. A number of states, about half the states, have chosen an option that makes it even less likely to have a cliff, which is the categorical eligibility option. So the federal policy framework allows states to deliver it in a very effective way, and those states that take a hard look at their own delivery systems, their own computers, their own local offices, are able to then live up to that promise.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. We'll next go to Mr. Thompson.
Chairman, thank you for this hearing. Very important. To all the members of the panel, thank you very much for coming, lending your experience, your expertise. I want to start out with Mr. Mulligan. In SNAP, we expected the program roles to increase with the recession. They did, rising by 81% since 2007, before finally peaking in 2013. Since that peak, we've only seen a decline of 3%. Can you talk more about what the data says about the situation, and are you at all surprised?
Sure, yeah. My data is maybe a year or two out of date. I looked at SNAP before and during the recession through about 2011, and I saw that state by state, the rules had changed. And probably the biggest thing that happened is the asset tests were eliminated, which eliminated some of these barriers to bringing people into the program. So now it was easier to get in the program than it used to be, and then so naturally you have more people on the program. That's natural. The other economic side of it is you have more disincentive. Now this is kind of, especially for unmarried people, it's a kind of new unemployment assistance program that can go far beyond 99 weeks.
Thank you.
So, could I just add to that? Because I think the answers that most economists have come up with who've looked into that is that it is now going down. SNAP rose with the recession. It is now going down. You would expect it to be a somewhat delayed effect because the effect of better income for the bottom end of the labor force has happened last. So most people think it is about the economy, not about the policy changes.
I want to talk a little bit about within the process of the resources that are out there, because we talk about obviously providing incentives, job training. I co-chair with a good friend of mine from Rhode Island, Jim Langevin, the Career and Technical Education Caucus. And so I want to talk about not so much the process, but the pathway in terms of job training. And we're preparing an education and workforce with the Perkins Act, which is all about job training, career and tech ed funding. I'm not sure going to have time to get input from everyone, but so if you have thoughts, I'd appreciate you send those to me in writing. But my question is, I'm looking for that response from, in your experiences, what are the key considerations to assure access to effective job training? In other words, job training that actually leads to a job, family-sustaining job, and a greater opportunity. Put folks on that pathway. I do believe that our programs that we have, our safety net programs, SNAP, welfare, the other welfare programs, I think they really need to be defined by as workforce development.
Mr. Thompson, if I could just quickly answer. I think there are a lot of efforts in the educational area that are promising. I think apprenticeships are one of them, for instance, where we've done very little. But I'd also like to comment just in general, in the course of this hearing, there are these programs that I think are mainly aimed at mobility, in which I would include education, training. I would probably include things like the earned income tax credit. And there are other programs that are mainly aimed at consumption. It's the programs that are aimed at consumption, providing minimum levels of consumption, that provide a lot of these cliffs and issues we're facing. But if you look at the budget for children, we've mainly been talking about programs for children, they're actually pretty much in decline. The earned income credit isn't indexed. It doesn't grow with the economy. The child credit is indexed for inflation. I'm guessing SNAP benefits in real terms per person are not going up. They've been expanding the number of people getting them. TANF has certainly been declining relative to the economy. So those programs, children's programs, are actually relative to decline. It's a separate subject. That's because all of our social welfare budget is going for health and retirement, but that's a different issue. So I think that what's happening with the children's budget is eventually going to be turned around, and I see an opportunity when that turnaround comes to start devoting more money to these mobility efforts. I'm not saying every mobility effort works, but these types of things like training and education do not create the types of disincentive effects that we're actually talking about here. Generally speaking, they're all in the positive incentive effect. I'm not saying they all work, but I think there's a lot of opportunities by thinking about what a future budget would be if it moves in the direction you're talking about.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Davis, you're recognized. I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of the witnesses for having been here. Dr. Golden, I know that you've done some work in Illinois, and you were here when Ms. McCorkle testified. I think maybe her situation may have been a little different in Illinois. Could you comment on that and why it may have been?
Please use your microphone.
Illinois is one of the 6 states that we're working with, and I would say a couple things, both similarities and differences to Ms. McCorkle's situation. Illinois and Maryland have both made the choice to expand Medicaid, so they're both states where taking a job, leaving welfare and taking a job isn't going to force a parent to lose their health insurance, so that's very important. One of the things that Ms. McCorkle highlighted in Maryland was about child care, right? It was about not only your challenges in the copay now, but the fact that when you were working before you went on welfare, you couldn't get child care because Maryland has a waiting list. Illinois, by contrast, has a historic commitment to not having a waiting list and to serving families, but the challenge right now is that in terms of dollars, it goes back to that point that what the states need is not flexibility, but resources. They're very stressed trying to be able to keep that commitment, and so additional federal dollars to address child care needs for low-income working families, I think will be very important in the future as Illinois seeks to keep that commitment.
Can I interject on that? This is an issue that we have studied. We have studied the child care issue specifically in Illinois, and I've also worked with the program in Pennsylvania and a couple other states. It is true that in Illinois you do not have a waiting list for child care. However, there are a number of steps that they can take administratively to reduce the cost. The child care program in Illinois is costing approximately $1.2 billion with a state budget general fund of only $34 billion. So it's a significant program, but there are certainly steps they can take administratively to bring the costs down. You do not need to increase federal dollars to give to the states to solve the problem. A lot of the problem can be solved simply by the states better managing it.
Thank you both very much, and by no stretch of imagination would I suggest that Illinois does not have problems and unmet needs. But I did want to point out this difference because of the fact that there was a strong advocacy effort on the part of citizens who made it happen. And I simply wanted to give them an accolade for that. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Next, we'll go to Mr. Crowley. You're recognized now for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did miss the Chairman Ryan's opening statement, but I did take note in his printed version of it that he quoted a very popular person to quote these days, Pope Francis. And he said, where there is no work, there is no dignity. And I think we can all find agreements in that. I know Mr. McGovern and Ms. Fudge talked about the importance of a living wage. So here's another quote from Pope Francis, and I quote, "A just wage enables human beings to have adequate access to all the other goods which are destined for our common use." And that's from Joy of the Gospel 192. So I hope this means we can consider legislation to raise the minimum wage, since Pope Francis said that as well. We won't go into climate change, there's not enough time right now for that. But I do want to thank the chairman. I want to thank my colleagues from the Ag Committee for joining us today as well. Let me start by saying that I think the majority of us here want to support and do support work while we strengthen our safety net programs. It's not an either-or situation. And Ms. Golden, you mentioned explicit in your testimony that there is overwhelming evidence that the safety net supports work, so that's important to recognize. But I do want to make sure we are clear on what it means to support and encourage work. To me, that means strengthening, not weakening, programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Child Tax Credit. These are programs that directly and without doubt reward work for lowest income families. It gives them the net effect of earning more, puts more money in their pockets. We need to extend the expiring provisions of these programs and ensure they are reaching their full potential for the families that they serve. Enhancements like linking the amount of the child tax credit to inflation, making permanent the higher credit amounts set in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and make the tax credits fully refundable. Another critical part of the encouraging work through the safety net is child care. And I appreciate the discussion just before my testimony. No matter what program we're looking at, if we want to help people work, we need to help them find and afford child care for their children. If they simply went out and worked, we'd be just piling on to the social ills of a society, which the other side of the aisle would decry at the same time. So otherwise, you can add in as many work requirements and restrictions and other burdens as you think of, and all you'll end up doing is forcing people off these programs to make those tough choices and, quite frankly, spiraling them further into deeper poverty. We need to make a significant investment in child care to make sure it reaches more people who need it. I will soon be reintroducing my Child First Act to make a greater investment in funding for child care. President Obama has proposed investing $82 billion over 10 years in mandatory funding for child care, which will provide more than an additional 1 million children under age 4 with access to quality child care. That not only helps the child, but helps the family, helps society, and helps people work. And with that, I will yield it back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Next, we'll go to Ms. Grisham. You're recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee, my arms are barely long enough to actually reach the button for the microphone, so thank you for your patience. I'm also very appreciative for the joint committee hearing, and Mr. Chairman, appreciate the opportunity to talk about not only basic benefits, but a benefit that in my state is incredibly important, which is the SNAP benefit. And I really appreciate the remarks of my colleague, Mr. Crowley, because I agree that we have a tendency as policymakers to do an all-or-nothing design, that we believe potentially, and based on some of the testimony, that welfare or entitlements or government support programs actually create a disincentive to work. And in my opinion, and in my experience, a disincentive to work is poverty. A disincentive to work is hunger. A disincentive to work is lack of adequate education and support and investment. Environmental barriers, transportation barriers, there are no dearth, and they are all really devastating aspects and barriers to work. Now, in my state, we have one of the worst economic recoveries in the country. We also have the hungriest children in the country. Not something I'm very proud of, and I'd love to see Congress and my state legislature declare a war on poverty and assure that no child in my home state ever goes hungry ever again. It's devastating. We also have one of the hungriest adult populations in the country, and while I tell you this, because of this debate, our state is enhancing our work requirements on young families, mothers who are 19 without the education, training, or support, even in a productive job market, to attain that work requirement. We don't have jobs. We're the only state in the country where we have a migrating effect where people have to leave the state to get jobs. This only translates to families losing benefits, which means they have no opportunity to have their basic needs met while we as policymakers figure out those balances so that we create a safe and effective environmental effort. With whatever time I have left, can anyone talk about making sure that there are ideas for states like New Mexico where you cannot meet even the basic work requirements, but we don't want to minimize that people do want dignity and want effective, productive work available to them in a meaningful way.
Let me underline.
I can.
I'm sorry.
All right. You're correct that we still have an issue of poverty in this nation. Absolutely. However, I just want to say that if we attempt to solve the problem one piece at a time, we're not going to get the answer. And let me just go to what we talked about, training. I sat in a focus group. I was not the participant. I was helping managing the focus group, where we've had people who received training, but they ran into that ladder where the rungs are kicked out and they had to give up a better job that offered more because they would lose benefits. So if we continue to look at this piece, just the SNAP alone, or another program over here, and hope that that's somehow going to solve the problem, we'll never get at the answer. You have to approach it systemically. You have to look at all the programs together and how do you combine the programs. Look, when someone needs help.
Mr. Randolph, I'm going to reclaim part of my time, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know how much time I have left. Huh? Ms. Golden, can I go to Ms. Golden?
Yes. So what I would highlight is that, first of all, you're absolutely right about the extent to which poverty itself is a barrier to work. And the research supports that and says that if you're able to eat and your life isn't disrupted and you're not constantly evicted, that contributes to working and moving up. So I think that's exactly right. And I do think that the other, with only one moment to say, that job training for adults ought to go hand in hand with investment in kids, with children not being hungry. That is an opportunity investment, right? We know that when kids are not hungry and are able to get their health taken care of and are in early child care, that in itself is an opportunity investment in their later lives. So we ought to be putting these things together.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Ms. Noem?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the tenets of the American dream is that no matter what your circumstances are, if you work hard here in America, that you can succeed. And in South Dakota, we have a very strong work ethic, and many are willing to put in long, hard hours to make life better for their families. It's those values that I've tried to instill in my own children, and I follow when I'm serving the people of South Dakota here in Congress. But unfortunately, the federal government doesn't always operate that way. Instead of encouraging work and taking home higher pay, the programs can create disincentives to work. And we've heard some of that testimony by all of you here today. It might not always make sense economically for a family to work more hours or at higher wages in the current system that we have today with a lot of our programs. So, Ms. Nettis, I wanted to ask you specifically, setting aside the work disincentive effects of these programs, does the sheer complexity behind multiple benefit programs and tax programs help or hurt families? And does it promote work and self-sufficiency?
I think it promotes work with limitations. I mean, we have people that are eager to go to work, so they want to do so. But it's kind of, they're tossed as to whether or not they should take a full-time job versus a part-time job.
So would it help to streamline the programs in a manner that wouldn't be quite so complex to help them utilize it in a manner better to allow them to work and potentially have a transitional program?
I think so. I mean, we're looking more so for a longer transitional period. I do know that in Maryland they do provide that, but again, it's the time frame for, it's kind of immediate that the transition happens, not often giving the person the time or a chance to really be able to build and save. So it would be, you would need a transitional period, a little bit more extended than what they have right now, in order for the person to be able to maintain.
Do you feel that most people need assistance from an organization like yours in order to navigate the programs that are currently available?
They do. They need us because we know how to essentially walk them through the system. Most people who are going through this process, they have no one to tell them how to do it. Mm-hmm. So when they come to our organization, we can help explain a lot of the changes they're going to undergo. Okay. And so a company like ours would definitely be able to help a person like Chanel, as we plan to do as she goes through her next transition into employment.
Well, Ms. McCorkle, I wanted to ask you that. Do the agencies provide you providing you benefits and give you a clear information about what happens if you work and if you earn more money? Have you ever discussed with live people that are a part of these agencies and departments what the consequences are? Or did you need an organization like Ms. Nettis is a part of in order to have that kind of clarification?
I actually did need America Works to help it, because when you're applying for your benefits, you don't actually speak to anybody. Nobody actually tells you what's going to happen when you get your job. It just happens that they find out you work, the letter comes in the mail, they're telling you this is cut, and this is what's happening, and then you're at the office. You come to the office and you want to talk to somebody. Half the time you don't get your caseworker. You just get a different representative. They don't explain it. They just tell you what happened. They don't actually explain anything. It just comes through the mail.
Okay, I appreciate that testimony. That's very helpful. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McCorkle, it's a pleasure to hear your testimony earlier, and I just thought it was very troubling whenever you look at the journey and the path that you've had to take, but it shows that you're a remarkable human being, and you're doing an amazing job, and I'm extremely proud of you to see everything. When I look at your testimony that it talks about the child care, that you couldn't get the child care vouchers when you had a job, but when you didn't have a job, you could get the child care vouchers when you're home. The whole process just isn't working. And I just appreciate you being here before the committee, and I just want to say thank you. In regards to Mr. Mulligan and Mr. Sturley, I would like to hear if you both would like to add some additional comments of how you could help incentives that we could try to break this poverty trap through the benefits curve.
Mr. Smith, as I said in my testimony, I think the real way around this trap to break the Gordian knot is to start thinking in the future, because government does gradually grow, and the social welfare budget does grow, just because the economy grows. Might be a smaller share of the economy, but larger, is to think about orienting more and more resources towards things that provide mobility. It's education, it's wage subsidies, it's a lot of the other items we've talked about, and I think we've been moving in that direction. If you look at both what welfare reform did and the movement away from AFDC, we sort of been moving in that direction. When we just try to provide minimum levels of consumption by itself, initially when people are starving or something, it does them good, but above certain levels, it provides a lot of discouragement. But things like primary and secondary education doesn't discourage work. So if we start moving the budget towards those mobility front, I think we can go a long way. And I'd just like to clarify one earlier part of this debate between whether these programs do or do not discourage work. The movement we've had recently has moved us away from a poverty trap to what one of my colleagues and I now call a twice poverty trap, or 3 times poverty trap. That is from about $0 to $15,000 of income. We have moved our programs in a direction of encouraging work. And if you take most of the examples that people around the table have given, when you get to about $15,000 of income, up to about $55,000 of income, now you've got average tax rates of maybe 66% in the universal programs, 70 or 80% in the non-universal, and then you add on child care, and you can get this type of trap. So I think you have to distinguish where we're talking about these traps encouraging. And right now, it's this trap where if you move, as I say, beyond a part-time job, you marry, you get a second job, that's where we really are discouraging work quite a bit, or moving to a higher paid job, as several people have mentioned.
Yeah, I also speak for something that hasn't been represented, and that's the marketplace, the employers. They're teaching people things. It's not just government programs that teach people things, not even just schools, even though I come from one. And things like the minimum wage go exactly in the wrong direction. What the minimum wage says is a job is a mix of things you learn and cash you take home. And the minimum wage says, look, you have to put it all in the cash and very little in the learning. And that's only going to make these kind of traps worse. Human capital is the most important asset in America and in the world, and policies like these discourage the accumulation of human capital and keep people's incomes low.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman's time's expired. Well, before we close this hearing, I want to read 2 quotes out for the record. One is from Harvard professor Jeff Liebman, former economic advisor to President Obama, and I quote, despite the EITC and child credit, the poverty trap is still very much a reality in the U.S., end quote. And then the second quote comes from Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who during a June 2012 Human Resources Subcommittee hearing said, I quote, "I once had a job and begged my supervisor not to give me a 50-cent an hour raise lest I lose daycare," end quote. The fact is, we still have poverty. The poverty trap still exists. And the problem is complicated by the fact that we have a myriad of programs that have been created over the course of years without good coordination. And so this hearing, this joint hearing, is a start in trying to unravel that Gordian knot so that we have these programs that will work best for those that they're intended to work for. And with that, Ms. McCorkle, I think your personal story was very compelling, very helpful to us. I just want to say thank you for your courage in coming forward to present it. I want to thank all of our witnesses for the tremendous expertise you bring to the table. And as we try to deal with this complex problem of how the program has disincentives to move into the work world, you all did a terrific job to help us shed light on these issues. I think members may have additional questions, which we will submit to you in writing, and we would appreciate your responses for the record within 2 weeks. I also want to close by thanking our colleagues on the Nutrition Subcommittee, starting with Chairwoman Walorski, Ranking Member McGovern. From my perspective, working together like this can only be helpful in our efforts to provide better, more coordinated services for those in need. I want to thank Chairman Ryan and Chairman Conaway and the rest of our colleagues also on the Ways and Means Committee. I thank you and your staff for working with us to make this joint hearing a reality. I look forward to working more with everyone concerned in the weeks ahead. And with that, this subcommittee now stands adjourned. Thank you, Troy. Thanks. It was